what's up? My name is Dom. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new to my channel, I typically make bookish content, movie content, and anything else in between because I like to do whatever I want on this channel, and tonight is going to be bookish content. For today's video, we are going to go over the 7 books I read in the month of March. Without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So the first book I want to talk about, I actually started in February, but I finished it in March, and that is Made by J.M. Darhower. So this is actually a companion novel to a duology I read in 2023 and 2024. I read the first book and the second book respectively in those years. And it's called the Sempre duology, and it's a mafia romance, and it's about 2 teenagers who one's involved, and they're both involved in the mafia, but like one is the child of a mafia member while the other one is a slave. Girl, it's a mafia romance, so it's gonna be some weird shit, but it's a slave that's being brought into this family, and the son of the mafia member falls in love with her. So for that entire book and then the next book, he's trying to get her out of that and just get the girl in the end, with a lot of other things going on. I have kind of like a love-hate relationship with it because it's very corny and cheesy, but it takes place in Chicago, which is where I grew up. I grew up in an Italian-American family like these characters, so there was like a personal feeling to it. But the most striking thing about those books is that, so the main kid's name was Carmine. He has an uncle and aunt named Corrado and Celia, and I remember liking that couple more than the main couple, just because the 2 of them fall under the trope where like the guy is a hard ass and people are afraid of him. He's a man of few words, but he worships the ground that Celia walks on, and I was giggling and kicking my feet in the air. So when I found out he had a companion novel, I was like, oh my goodness, I need to read this. Made is the life of Corrado Moretti from that duology. This is essentially supposed to be Corrado's biography. Something I really appreciated was actually seeing Corrado's beginnings, because as an adult he is very cold, and I kind of want to say unsympathetic, because he's the main murderer of the mafia, of this little clique, and he has no remorse for these people. If the boss tells him to do it, he does it, despite how he may personally feel about it. Like, he has killed friends before. So it was interesting to see his beginnings just as a child, why he became the way he did, and how his parents, his mom was abusive, his dad loved him but had a hard time sticking up to the mom in a sense, and how it just hardened Corrado's heart. And I also really did like the lovey-dovey parts between him and Celia, as corny as they could be sometimes, but it's because I liked them as a couple so much. So that worked really well for me. And I also like the tie-ins to the OG duology. We got to see a lot of those scenes, but in Corrado's point of view, and just little lines from the OG duology that were turned into major scenes in this, because I remember there was a passing comment in the OG series where Carmine is telling Haven, Celia used to get really mad at Corrado, but then one day she asked what he does for a living. He told her and she just never asked again. It was a throwaway line in that book, but in this one it's a whole chapter, and it's actually a really sad chapter, and because Celia was just so angry, and then what Corrado ended up telling her. And to go off of that, I did think this book did the sad scenes really well. I do have some complaints about this book. It's unfortunately not perfect, despite how excited I was to go into it. When it comes to the romance, this book expects you to have read the OG duology. There's little to no development between Corrado and Celia. They kind of just happen, and I was excited to see that, but that's because I know them as a couple already. If you go into this book first without having read the first 2 books, like it may be too fast for you. And also the last 50 pages of this book, that's when we get a lot of the stuff that's from the OG duology, but it moves really fast. So I knew what was going on because I read the first 2 books. If you go into this first, you might have no idea what the fuck is happening. Things are just happening to characters because they have to. I wanted to see more of the negative sides to Corrado and Celia, just because they would fight in this book, but we never got resolutions to those fights. They would walk out the room, slam the doors in each other's faces, and then in the next chapter they were fine. But like, how did they solve that problem? How did they overcome that? I don't know, because we never really saw that. This book is also weirdly researched because it takes place in Chicago. So there are things I recognize, and the author, from what I read about her, is not from there, but she got the neighborhoods correct. She mentions things only Chicagoans would know. She got a lot of our slang correct, but then like the weirdest thing would be wrong. I forgot what the exact game was, but there was a game that Corrado plays as a kid in the late 60s, early 70s that I looked up, and it didn't come out until the 80s. So it's like, how did you get our weird slang correct, but not something easily Googleable? Googleable, that is a word. And lastly, this book is long. There are definitely chapters that weren't needed. This book is also 530 pages. So if you think about it, these 3 books combined are a total of 1,000, am I doing the math correctly? 1,590 pages. 3 books that are all romances. And just some random commentary I have about this book that doesn't really affect my rating any which way, but one of the first things I noticed is how everyone is so fucking young in this book. Per her acknowledgments page in the other 2 books, the author was inspired by Twilight, where a lot of things happen at very young ages. So Corrado and Celia, they're married by 18. I can't even fucking imagine. Celia's dad is only 18 years older than her, and that is not because she was in like an oopsie or anything. He got married at 17, 18 years old and had her at 18 and is one of the youngest mafia bosses at 30-something years old. Corrado's dad's also fairly young, all things considered. He was also about 18, 19 when Corrado was born, and I just can't imagine it happening. It fits. Like, a lot of Italian-Americans in Chicago in my parents' generation, which is kind of when Corrado and Celia are, they were young when these things happened, but just being like an elder Gen Z reading this at 27, unmarried with no kids, it's like startling. I can't imagine going through the shit they went through at this age. In the first 2 books, it's Corrado and Celia, it's like a thing that they don't have kids, and this book was advertised as an answer as to why, and I was expecting a lot more than the answer we got. It was just Corrado decided that for them because he didn't want to bring a child into this lifestyle, which is understandable, and I respect that. It's just we didn't get Celia's point of view in this. I would have really liked to see Celia talk about it, or see them, all these fucking pages, and yet this conversation seemed to never happen in this book. I wanted to see them have the conversation about kids, because to me it seemed like Celia adored children, so I would have thought she wanted them. So that's definitely a conversation I would have liked to see these 2 have. It's haunting seeing Corrado's earlier days in this book, where he's talking to his twin sister Katrina, knowing he kills her in the first book. They never got along, so it kind of tracks that he ends up killing her, but it was just weird and uncomfortable seeing those interactions, knowing what was to come. But overall, despite grievances and those weird things I noticed, I did enjoy this book. The ending broke my heart and like pissed me off, but it's a biography, so I understand why it had to happen. I just wish it did not, because I feel bad for Celia. But I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read is a sequel to a book I read in January, and that is Then by Morris Gleitzman. The first book was Once. The first book is about a 10-year-old boy named Felix who runs away from the orphanage he was hiding in as a Jew. He was a Jewish kid hiding in a Catholic orphanage. He runs away because he's worried about his parents, and then he just gets caught up in the swell of Nazi Europe. And in this one, him and his friend Zelda are in hiding. I kind of had the same views on this book that I did with Once. Like, overall, Once is a good book. It just feels like something I've read before, and that is how I feel about this one, although I do like it slightly better, only because I thought the person who was hiding them, it was an interesting idea. And that's because she tells them she hates, as a Polish Catholic, she hates Jews, but what she hates more is people killing children no matter their background. I just thought that was an interesting train of thought, and it caused them to have a very interesting conversation, her, Felix, and Zelda. And this book also has a sad ending that leaves you wondering what the hell is going to happen, because this was originally a trilogy, and I think the author just added like 4 more books, but the next book is what's going to end this main idea that he was going for. So I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then I read a manga, and that is Spy X Family Volume 15 by Tatsuya Endo. So Spy X Family takes place in a world that's in the midst of a Cold War. It's the East versus the West. Agent Twilight is a spy on the West, and he has to stop a war that Donovan Desmond can start. He's a guy from the East. But in order to do that, he is required to create this fake family, so he adopts a little girl named Anya, and he convinces a woman named Yor to marry him. Yor doesn't know that Lloyd, his pseudonym, is a spy. Lloyd doesn't know that Yor is an assassin. Neither of them know that Anya is a telepath, and Anya, being a telepath, knows everything, but she's only 5 and she actually acts like a 5-year-old, so there's a lot of shenanigans involved with that. I obviously cannot tell you the exact plot to this volume because that is just spoiler galore, but there are a lot of things I liked about it. We learned a lot more about the war from the past and why modern Berlin is the way it is. So the world of Spy X Family kind of works like our world. Like, there was a World War I, a World War II, and now this Cold War. The war this volume specifically focuses on is World War I. And without spoiling, I just want to say justice for Martha and Henry Henderson. Martha is a very considerate character though, which makes me respect her more, and I actually really liked her character. For a while she was just in the background and I was indifferent to her, but this definitely raised my expectations and made me like her more. And I just really like the slice of life elements in this volume. My favorite being the carnival where all the kids in the classes got together and just had a lot of fun despite their past grievances. I thought that was just so cute and funny, and it like made me nostalgic because I remember those days. I really like the small development between Lloyd and Yor. It is slow going, it is a slow burn, but having said that, they're moving at the exact pace I would expect two adults holding each other at arm's length to move. I really like the addition of Jeeves. I think he's a really great character. And there's a chapter with Donovan Desmond and his family, and that man freaks me out. The tension in that chapter was palpable. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read is actually a comic book, and a big one at that, and that is The Legend of Korra Turf Wars, and this is by the original creator of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Michael Dante DiMartino. Legend of Korra is the sequel to Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is my favorite show of all time. This takes place in the world where people can control the 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Then you have the Avatar who can control all 4. So this is the first comic book outside of the Legend of Korra TV show, and it picks up right where we left off. So this is about Korra and Asami finishing their vacation, and they come back to find that this guy wants to make an amusement park in the lands of the Spirit Lands, and the new leader of the gang wants to take over the city. One of the first things I noticed about when reading this was the art in this comic book. I think when it comes to all the Avatar comics, these are my favorite artists by far. I liked a lot of the new character designs for characters we've never seen before, specifically for Tokuga. He's the gang leader. I liked him both in his human form and his spirit form. Something I appreciate about this comic is that Korrasami is allowed to be more explicit. If you don't know who Korrasami is, at the end of Legend of Korra, Korra is endgame with a woman named Asami, so it's a sapphic relationship. However, at the time, Nickelodeon didn't allow for LGBT couples, so really all they were allowed to do was hold hands, look into each other's eyes, and go on vacation. And I think it had to be verified online that yes, they are a couple. But in this comic book, they're actually allowed to kiss, they're allowed to call each other their girlfriends, they're allowed to tell people. And they have a really endearing conversation with Kaya, Aang and Katara's daughter, who also happens to like women. And we also get a history of how the LGBT community is viewed in the 4 nations. Very brief, and if you read the foreword, the author does apologize that he couldn't get into more detail because he just had so many limitations when it came to writing this. But I think given how much room he had, he provided more than enough information. At least enough to satisfy me, but then it leaves enough open for it to be explored more in different comics. I also really like seeing the character Zhu Li shine in this. She's a very minor character in the Legend of Korra show, at least in seasons 2 and 3. She gets a bigger role in season 4. I will never understand the relationship between her and Varrick. I understand what Varrick sees in her, and I can understand in theory what she sees in Varrick, but I just thought he treated her like fucking garbage, and I would have walked out the door. I would not have gotten back with him. That's just me, and I'm glad Varrick had a much smaller role in this than she did. And just speaking of characters, one thing I appreciate about this comic is that right off the bat, all the characters feel in character. One of the biggest critiques of the Avatar: The Last Airbender comics, especially those first few, everyone feels out of character in some way. And a lot of people attribute to that to having a different author, and I totally get it, and I think it really helps that Bryke, the main 2, worked on this, because I didn't feel Korra and Asami, everyone, nobody felt off. They all felt like the characters I grew to love watching the original Legend of Korra. And going back to the art, something I really loved about it is the background characters. There's so much more diversity in the Legend of Korra background characters than the Avatar characters, which makes sense because Avatar: The Last Airbender, that's when Bryke were getting their foot in the door, and as their world developed, I'm sure more ideas developed, and you really see that in Korra. But then also it's because Korra doesn't take place in one of the 4 nations that had been segregated for so long. Korra takes place in Republic City, where everyone from every nation is able to live. So obviously there's a lot of mixed marriages. It's going to be common for people to be half Water Tribe, half Fire Nation, or maybe half Water Tribe and quarter Fire Nation, quarter Earth Kingdom. And you truly see that diversity in the background characters. They're wearing mixed clothing, so people aren't wearing exclusively blue anymore. They're wearing maybe blue gloves with a yellow shirt and a green band. Not only that, they clearly brought in inspiration from other cultures. We have a new character actually who's clearly inspired by Indian culture, and then a lot of the background characters are actually wearing hijab, so they're bringing in Muslim culture as well. And I really like seeing that. I like seeing how as the series progresses, more ideas are coming in and there's just more diversity involved. The one thing I really disliked about this was just the constant back and forth between Korra and Asami. Like, one minute they're fine, the next they're not. And like, I understand part of this story was the two of them learning to work as a team, but not only as a team, but like as a couple, because they were working as a team in the OG show, but now they're in a romantic relationship. Like, I get that, but it got kind of repetitive and annoying. So despite all the praise I gave it though, when it came to the story itself, I thought it was just fine. It's not something, I understand why they focused on this for Korra, but I think I would have just liked another idea, like a more entertaining story. So I liked it, it just wasn't one of my favorites, so I did give this 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read, and fair warning, you may or may not be taken aback by the cover, but hear me out. It's Look Who's Back by Timur Vermes. So this book takes place in 2011, and it's about Adolf Hitler coming back to life, and it's in his point of view. I think I first saw this book at a bookstore when I was still in college, so it's been a while. And I remember reading the synopsis being like, what the fuck is this? Like, I have to read it because what? Like, why would you dare do that? But then I looked more into the book, and it is a satire that's basically a commentary about what would happen if we brought back Hitler's policies. And by the end of the book, I did find it an effective satire. All throughout the book, Hitler never realizes he's the butt of the joke. And it's just so funny watching him getting frustrated at these people asking him what his real name is because they all think he's an actor. He's not getting that these people don't think he's the real deal. So while he thinks he's successful, which he like explicitly says, like, oh, I am doing a good job, the German Volk are behind my back again, you see from the side characters' reactions that they're not looking at him the way he thinks they are. They all think he's just a funny comedian. And it's just also the way Hitler's point of view is written. He says a lot of outrageous things. Like, a lot of what he says is very much in character from what I've read about the real life Hitler, but it's written in a way where you as the audience, despite the main protagonist thinking it's a good thing, you as the audience are very well aware it's not. It's very much a bad thing. And I like where in the timeline this book ends. It ends leaving just enough information to leave you wondering if the joke is going to continue or if it's going to get out of control. And I will say some of the statements in this, a lot of them actually, were a little haunting to read given the current political climate in the US. So some of it wasn't fun. It was definitely a downer. This book took me a while to get through because of that and because of another reason, but I will get to that. The arrogance in this book is so well written that I had to listen to this book in small intervals. Usually I could just get through an audiobook because I listen to them while I'm at work, and usually I can get through them in like 2 days because I'll listen to 5 hours one day and then the rest of the book the next day. This book was I put it on 1.45 speed, so this book ended up being about 7 hours total for me, and it took me like 2 weeks to get through just because I could only listen to it at 30-minute intervals. So like, it's not necessarily a critique because it's Hitler, he's supposed to be a terrible person, and clearly the author did a good job capturing that, but it makes it difficult. It makes it difficult to consume this book as entertainment. So I'm not going to dock it points for that, but what I'm really going to dock it points for is just the amount of, is the rants that Hitler goes on. Like, the amount of rants and then the type of rants, because they're obviously, it's Hitler, so they're obviously mean-spirited, but he just goes on and on forever, and it got tiresome to listen to, and it just happens way too much throughout this book. So overall, despite it being an effective satire, I did give this like a pretty low-ish rating. Not terrible. It's not the worst book of the year or anything, but it's middle of the road for me. 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read is The Executioner by Chris Carter. This is a murder mystery. A priest is found dead in his parish and his head has been replaced with a dog's head. This book has a very strong opener that I really like. Leaves you wondering what the fuck is wrong with this killer. And I really liked the killer's theme, which I can't say because it is a spoiler. And there's a lot of graphic description in this book that could be a hit or miss for people. They made me cringe in my seat, but I'm going to consider it a hit because I feel like that's what the author was going for. This is the Robert Hunter series. It's book 2. You don't need to read the first book in order to understand this one because it's one of those like episodic murder mystery series. And these books are known for being gruesome and really fucked up. up, so the author did his job if I'm cringing in my seat. This had a lot of interesting psychological and criminal knowledge, just like the last book. I really like the character Molly and her dynamic with Robert Hunter, and I actually guessed the killer incorrectly, which I'm going to consider a compliment to this book because that was one of my issues with the last book. I accidentally guessed the killer in the last book because I remember saying I really hope it's not this person because that would be corny, and it ended up being that person. In this one, I was like, ooh, it's person A, and it ended up being person F. And then something else I liked about this book that I did not appreciate with the first book, in this book there's two cases, like the main case and then one that just gets mentioned on the slide. And the two cases actually interconnected. They had to do with each other, unlike the last book where I was left very confused, like why was case number 2 even brought up? But there were some things I disliked about this book. This book had the same issue I had with the first book, where at times it felt less like a story and just more so like a textbook in a way for the author to show off his knowledge in the psychological criminal justice system. And that's mainly to do with the very unnatural dialogue. Like I feel like I'm watching an old school episode of Law and Order where, you know, they have to explain everything to the audience and say the corniest lines. Because it would cause the characters to go out of character, because like his partner Garcia, there were things where he as a detective definitely should have known, but in order to spark a conversation with Hunter and to get Hunter to over-explain some of these things, Garcia would say something like, oh, I'm not following, or what does that mean, or can you explain that? And then next thing you know, you're reading like 2 pages worth of text of Hunter just going off. It helped sometimes, like some of the things Hunter said I found interesting and it really helped made me understand these characters, but then at other times I was like, this is going on forever. I don't need all this information. This is just not how humans talk to each other. The chapter breaks were really weird. They would just end at the most random times in order to force cliffhangers, but to me that just broke the flow of the story. Like there were so many chapters in here that definitely could have been grouped together, and I feel like that contributed to the weird dialogue, to the weird way these characters would interact with each other. And there were a lot of forced like pseudo-intellectual melodramatic descriptions, especially when like Robert would stare at something and like the person's not even doing anything, and he would be like, the face of evil, or the room, it smelled of blood, it smelled metallic, the smell of evil. And I'm like, oh my god, I could hear the dun 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 in my head as I'm reading this corny shit. But still, despite all that, it's a fun mystery that you don't need to think too hard about. You can shut your brain off when reading this book, and it has a very sweet ending. So I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. And finally, the last book I read in the month of March is Party Princess by Meg Cabot. This is book 7 in the Princess Diaries series. The Princess Diaries is about Mia Thermopolis. She is a freshman in high school, and she finds out she is the future heir of Genovia. In this book specifically, Mia is now a sophomore in high school, so year 2, she's 15 years old. She has to figure out a way to raise enough money for graduation after blowing it all as the class president. And I'm gonna say right off the bat, this is my least favorite book in the series so far. Everyone in this book was annoying. Some more than others, because others definitely had excuses for why they were acting like that, but oh my god. And some of it was realistic to how teenagers act, but there were other things where I'm like, girl, even we didn't act like that. You would have been punched in the face if you treated someone like that. Why is this happening? Why are you all friends with each other? And that's really what ruined this book for me. There's nothing else to say other than that. And I also just wasn't really interested in this plot specifically. The ongoing joke about the candles was pretty funny, but that's basically it. And also, the longer the series goes on, the more I really don't understand why she's friends with Lily. And I'm also questioning why she's still with Michael, because there was a character introduced in this that I actually like better than Michael, so we'll see how that... I know how it goes. I do know she's endgame with Michael by the end of the series, but why? You know what I mean? Why? So because of all that, I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars, and it's officially my least favorite book of 2025. So that's it. That's all I have to say for this video. Let me know your thoughts down below if you read any of these books, if you like them, dislike them, if they're on your TBR. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up, comment, subscribe. Y'all know the drill. And without further ado, I'm gonna peace out, and I'll see you guys later. Ciao a tutti.